Coming up next on The Voice of Alabama Politics, Sine Die and Good Riddance. Also, the V-Team takes a look at the life and legacy of Milton McGregor. And the Republican supermajority passes an economic development bill.
Everybody freeze!
Nobody move! Keep your hands up and your eyes down!
I'll tell her, back away from the cars, hands on your heads now! Everybody out on your desk, on the floor! Move it, move it! Now, get down!
What's the matter with you people?
You, out of the cubicle!
Get out of my way! Now back away from the counter and get your fucking hands up!
What's the matter with you?
Hey, you got your wax? Back away, keep your hands where I can see them!
Now!
Hands up!
So, that's what passes for an economic development professional. You got a gun, you got a mask, you're gonna take them to the cleaners, right? Alabama style. All this and much, much more coming up next on The V. Welcome to The Voice of Alabama Politics, where we tackle the tough issues so you have the hard facts. I'm your host, Bill Britt, and as always, I'm joined by the V-Team. Welcome all.
Hello.
Hello.
Happy Easter.
Hello.
Happy Easter, everybody.
Yeah.
He is risen, Jack. This week was not only a busy week, it was a sad week in a lot of ways. Last Sunday, of course. But Jack, in all the years of watching the state legislature, I have never seen a more despicable or disgraceful use of power than the passage of this so-called economic development jobs bill that passed and that was rushed out, you know, under just tremendous pressure.
It's the fat cat protection bill. And in the Catholic Church, we have Holy Week. This was Holy Smokes Week. I mean, the stuff they did over there, it's just unbelievable. And talking about rolling back ethics, boy, we saw a big dose of that, didn't we?
Yeah, I mean, it was like that, Susan, they said that they would do nothing, they wouldn't do nothing but pass this big ethics bill, and then they came along and tried to piecemeal and rewrite the ethics code in such a way as to weaken it.
Right, and this bill in particular, HB 317, was specifically targeted at site selectors, but now there's no definition of what an economic development professional is. There's no part-time, there's no less than full-time, there's no full-time, there's no definition at all. It's very broad-reaching.
I mean, Josh, when this bill, HB 317, was introduced by Ken Johnson, it had so many loopholes in it that, I mean, you know, Al Capone would still be out of jail. You know, I mean, it was just crazy.
Yeah, well, you know, as they say, all your best bills come from Moulton. So it's a joke. It is a joke, and I mean, you look back at the discussions over this thing, and they're so absurd. The absurdity of it all. When you ask, okay, this is gonna, when has this been a problem? Nobody could tell you when it was a problem. All right, how will this be a problem in the future? Nobody could tell you how it was going to be a problem in the future. It was literally something, a solution to a problem that didn't exist,
right.
and you could see what they were trying to do.
And we asked them, what projects are this? What are the projects that this bill is holding up?
Right.
And there was no answer.
None.
The idea meaning they tried to sell us on the fact that we wouldn't get companies coming to Alabama unless we passed this piece of legislation. Just like Hyundai wouldn't have come, or recently
Toyota Mazda.
Jack, they just wouldn't have come.
No, and I blame the leadership. I blame Del Marsh in the Senate, and I blame Mac McCutcheon, who, in my opinion, is just Mike Hubbard with a smile. It's the only difference. I mean, He's just, you know,
I
he's
don't-
awful.
no,
I know y'all.
I don't feel. He's not a crook.
No, he's not a crook.
But Marsh was the one that hot-footed this around.
I know.
Marsh hot-footed
But I
this
mean,
all the way through the
I
process.
get what you're saying. But listen, let's not forget the lady across the street she was trading votes at the last minute so that they could get this ambiguous bill together that Chris England said you could drive an economic development truck through.
Yeah.
And it started out to describe a very narrow group of people, right, Josh, as site selectors. People who come in and find sites, convince big companies to come down here and bribe us for our tax dollars.
Yes, that's exactly
or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, you know, the reason companies wouldn't come here have nothing to do with this thing. You know,
Right.
I mean, you know, it has to do with education and healthcare and all these other things that we have problems with. But so you have this bill the way this thing began was with site selectors. You were talking about roughly 70-ish people, and they were well defined, and that's how this was going to go. This was what was going to happen, and everybody was in agreement that these people, all right, you know, you had the problem where the Ethics Commission said these guys, you know, could be lobbyists, and everybody before that thought no, they weren't, and so you needed to define that for these specific people. But then when the bill hit the table, it was this broad range of people that it's going to be excused to hand out gifts to people.
And here's the point, and because we all know the subject so well, we make sure our audience knows. These people, so-called professional, economic professionals, developers, they are exempt from the state ethics laws.
Yes.
They can act like lobbyists, Jack, but they are not held to lobbyist
And
standards.
they don't even have to
Right.
register as an economic development
Let's
professional.
just strip off another layer of transparency. I mean, it's unbelievable.
It really is, and, you know, and Chris England on the floor really kind of knocked the thing down, and I mean, and really laid it out for people. What you go through what these people do, it's lobbying.
Right.
I mean, you can call it whatever you want, and you can beat around the bush however you like, but it's lobbying, and you've applied this negative connotation to lobbying now, and nobody wants to say that. But that's exactly what it is, and the only thing you're not doing is making these folks register as lobbyists and adhere to the rules.
And before we get back, you know, we really should be moving on, but we're going to have to stay on this one because one of the things they had in there, Susan, is they had this part-time provision, and we've talked about that before, which would allow anyone, let's say a Bob Riley or a Will Brook or any
Just names at random.
Right.
any name at random, to come in there and say, I'm a part-time economic development professional, and then hand out buckets full of cash to lawmakers to do their bidding.
And then when we asked them to close that loophole, the part-time loophole, they said, well, we've taken the part-time out.
Yeah.
They came back with less than full-time.
Less than full.
Yeah,
time.
right.
Full-time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then when they came back to fix that, they even took out the full-time.
Yeah.
So we have there are no restrictions, no guidelines of who these people could be.
No. Now we got about a minute left, so I mean, right now they just showed us that they do not care, that what they said in 2010, Jack, was all a lie. They don't care about tough ethics. But somebody said this was a successful session and it was graded B. I mean, on what curve?
I think the only thing successful is the suck part.
It's definitely on a bell curve, that's for sure.
But I'll just say this: I think it's. Claire's not here. It's egregious, and they know it is. And it was not even on the Allison website after it passed. It was, and then they took it down.
Yeah.
And we had to hammer on them to close the revolving door in it. Because it had a wide open revolving
yeah.
How
door.
many incumbents does this protect? Who are? Yeah, that's what I want to know.
Post-public officials, too.
Yeah,
I
that's
tell you
what
what,
I'm talking about.
somebody who's going to make hay out of this is gubernatorial hopeful Walt Maddox, who right before or after it passed, came out and challenged Kay Ivey to stand up to public corruption, not sign it. And guess what?
She didn't do that.
No! Imagine that. A governor of Alabama, a Republican governor, saying no to public corruption.
And you have to question why they were so hell-bent on passing
That's
this.
right. All right, we're going to leave it right there. You're watching The V, the voice of Alabama politics. We'll tell you like it is. They'll tell it to you like they want you to hear it. welcome back to the V, the voice of Alabama politics. Josh, there's
I'm glad you started with me.
some occasions
You knew we
where your blood pressure boils rather quickly. During this session, there was a bill that would require that law enforcement officers would record stops that they made, also record the age, gender, and racial makeup of the people that they pulled over. And you would have thought that we were passing a bill to legalize something as evil as marijuana.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, it was terrible.
Yeah, so it failed. The racial profiling bill failed. And I mean, you know, this was brought by Roger Smitherman, Senator there, who gave a pretty impassioned plea and a personal experience of being pulled over in his own neighborhood, going home and talking about these things. And he wanted to explore whether or not there was a problem in this state with racial profiling by the police. Now, there are a couple of former cops in our legislature, and each one of those cops got up and talked about this. And when they got up and talked about it, they all said, we have a problem with racial profiling in this state, but, and it's the but part that kills me.
Well, and Roger Smitherman's senator, he is black, and Jack, we've heard it time and time again, and I think, you know, listen, I don't want to get too far on this, but we hear the term DWB, driving while black, and people are pulled over. It appears we want to know whether they're being pulled over for their race, their age, their gender, but no one seemed to think this was a good idea, and maybe, I don't know.
Well, no policeman is going to tell you they pulled over somebody because they were black or Hispanic. But didn't the bill require them to report all of these facts, the age, the gender, the race of the person they pull over?
It's a data collecting bill.
Yeah, it was a data collection deal. Yeah, all they had to do was report it to the Attorney General's office. Nobody was going to be fired. They wanted to send us to the Attorney General's office so you could compile the data and determine whether or not there were certain areas, certain police forces who had a problem with racial profiling. Maybe they were treating people poorly in certain areas. You know, you had a problem with this in Ferguson. I know that will be a surprise to people, but there were 2 reports that came out of Ferguson, and the second one of those reports showed that there was a pretty bad problem with police there relying on pulling over black motorists there to pay the bills of the city. We have a similar problem with that in Montgomery. And so they wanted to know how big of an issue this is. Maybe it's not, but you're still pulling these people over. Why wouldn't you have to report that data to a collection agency like the Attorney General's office to compile it and take a look at what's going on?
I'm not trying to challenge you, but I've not heard this about Montgomery. I mean, I haven't heard it. Right. I mean, you may be aware of it.
We've had a lot of problems in Montgomery of locking poor people up that couldn't pay their fines, and we've had some federal courts come in.
Well, I mean, look, come on, we're all grown-ups here.
Sure.
To think that Alabama has lost all its racist past,
of course,
is just a little. It's not just naive; it's being dishonest. But we're going to have to move on from this. One of the other things they did, Jack, they passed both budgets, and they had them ready right off the bat. But of course, they can't pass the budgets first thing because they need the budgets to hold over people's head.
Right.
To get some.
They hold other bills in hostage over the budget bills. It's
crazy. So we passed a $6.6 billion education trust fund, Susan, and it did some good things.
I believe we passed it after we passed HB 317.
Yeah, well, they couldn't let, they had to hold that up.
There wasn't any. Yeah, they went ahead and passed both budgets, and it's good. They're balanced and nice. We've got the BP money in there this year, but next year, estimates started out 2 weeks ago. We've got a $90 million hole. By this week, it's a $100 million hole. No. What number are we climbing toward here,
Trip
folks?
Pittman stood up, Josh, in committee when they were trying to pass HB 317, and he said, we're looking at $100 million shortfall, and you were trying to give away the state with this piece of legislation.
Yeah, and a lot of people have seen this coming. There have been a lot of things that have been in the works. A lot of people suspect there's going to be some gambling, some lottery, some things that are in the budget in the coming session here to kind of bridge this $100 million plus gap, because it's going to be more than $100 million.
It is. If they're saying that now, it's going to be more.
It's going to be a huge hole there, and there's nothing to fill it. There is nothing to fill it with. There's no one-time money. There's no windfall coming. There's no nothing, and so you're going to have to fill this hole in some way because you've cut all you can cut.
Right. Well, we've always always lived off of from natural disaster to natural disaster. I want to get to these two bills in the last 2 minutes. Well, every year in the legislature, as we all know, they have what's called the Shroud Award. That's a bill that should have died, did die, and they award the person who brought it forward. Before we get to the Shroud Award, I want to go to the runner-up, Jack, and you're going to like this. So Mark Tuttle, Representative Mark Tuttle, he wanted to pass a law where the state would tax the forever wild land.
Property tax.
Property tax.
Put a property tax on the state.
Yeah.
For the state-owned land.
The state is going to put a property tax on state property.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the dumbest damn thing I've ever heard in my life.
Property tax.
I'm glad he's retiring.
And Susan, he got up and made this impassioned speech about the dishonest and evil media mischaracterizing his bill.
That's because all it had to do was just eke out a little bit, and every hunter, every environmentalist jumped all over him and every legislator they can get there.
Stupid media reading the bills.
Yeah,
How
it's
dare
awful.
they?
I'm just glad they didn't want to bait the state property for white-tailed deer, which is
bait
another
us and
dumb bill.
Yeah, well, okay, so the dumbest bill of the entire session was sponsored by Richie Wharton, or Horton, however his name is, Wharton, who also sponsored a bill that would let Mike Hubbard's previous crimes no longer be crimes. But the bill required, Susan, that you turn on your lights at precisely 1 minute after sunset and 1 minute, and leave them on until 1 minute after sunrise, and you had to use
the Farmer's Almanac. Can you imagine people riding down the road, flipping through the Farmer's Almanac? What time is it today? Because it changes every day in the Farmer's Almanac.
Well, and the best thing about it, Josh, was he took a picture with his iPhone showing a piece of the roadside he couldn't see because, it was too dark.
But the phone could see it.
But the phone could see it.
We have the dumbest people imaginable running this place. Oh, every time, every day, you listen to these conversations go on back and forth, and it's just the dumbest. It's just. What are we doing, man?
This didn't just come up once. It kept coming up. He kept bringing it up over and over again. And showing the picture on his cell phone of the car he couldn't see.
I think he's forgotten that modern cars, the lights come on when it gets dark, and they go
Well, you could always say, oh, it's a minute after dark, but I'm going to leave my lights off because the Farmer's Almanac doesn't say. I mean, come on.
Well, that's going to have to be the last word on this segment. Dumb and dumber. You're watching The V, the voice of Alabama politics. We'll be right back with a tribute to a man who was both loved and feared in the state of Alabama. Welcome back to The V, a very special tribute to Milton McGregor. Milton McGregor was a man who was both loved, revered, and feared. I think to most of us here, we knew the man much better than we knew the Politico.
Yeah.
But he will be remembered by us today in all his aspects. Josh, I think of all of us here, you probably knew Milton McGregor better than the rest of us?
We spent a lot of time, and it was really kind of by chance. I didn't know Milton at all until 3 or 4 years ago, and I started writing that in-depth gambling piece, and it had nothing to do with Milton McGregor at the time. It's actually, I had a new boss at the time, and he didn't understand this whole it's gaming issue here, and the bingo, electronic bingo. Somebody comes from out of state, and you look at electronic bingo, and you're like, what the hell is electronic bingo here? And so we were just trying to figure out what happened. And I called him, I called his office and talked to Linda, his secretary, and I got in, and from that day forward, we kind of had a relationship where he would call and I would get calls at all hours of the day and night of, it was a, hey, big boy, what's doing? And it was, and it was always, he was just such a personable, optimistic, and that's the thing that struck me first before I ever knew him about it really at all was the optimism of him, of how he thought about life and how he treated people and stuff. And he was, listen, I don't care how most people think of him, and I don't care what most people think of me as a journalist or whatever. When I say I admired him, and I took a lot of life lessons from him about the way he went about his business and the way he treated his family, the way he treated his friends, and the way he treated his enemies. And there's a lot of people who could learn a hell of a lot of lessons, and this state would be a lot better run if there were a lot more Milton McGregors running around.
Well, and for me and Susan, when we, came down here, we'd heard, when we came back from New York, it was around it was a little afterwards, the bingo thing was going on. We heard about how terrible it was, especially in Republican circles. And so being curious like we are, we want to meet the devil. We want to meet the devil. We want to meet the saint. And we went over and met with him and met his wife, Pat. And I'm telling you, they were the sweetest, down-to-earth people, Susan.
I've never seen sweeter, more down-to-earth, generous people in my life. They're just salt of the earth. And like you said, he was always so upbeat. Everything's good. Everything's great. Everything's moving forward.
Blowing and going, big boy. Blowing and going, but everything's good. Things are happening.
You were talking about the things with the people that he was around. There was a gentleman we talked to several years ago that works at a gas station here in Montgomery. And Milton McGregor came up to the gas station and he stuck out his hand to shake this mechanic's hand. And he went, "Oh, Mr. McGregor, I'm sorry, I have grease on my hands." He said, "No, sir." He said, "That's a working man's hand. I want to shake your hand. You're a working man."
Yeah. And Jack, Milton was like every businessman. He did some things that people, didn't like. He did some things that people loved. And he was a tough business guy. And for all the demagoguing and calling him names, he did what most business people do, is he looked for an advantage.
Yeah, he made money and knew how.
Yeah, he did.
And he came from very little. I first met him in 1986 at a Montgomery Young Republicans fundraiser. Jack Kemp came.
Oh, okay.
And we had an event, and Milton and Pat were there. And, that's when I first met him, and everybody said, "That's Milton McGregor. He's the guy over there in Macon County." He didn't seem that way at all. And I bumped into him over the years, but only in the last 4 years have we become good buddies. And I would go over there and meet with him, or he'd call me and say, "Hey, big boy, what you know about so and so?" Now I ain't told another soul this, but and he'd tell you something, then you find out later 10 other people knew it.
Well, he loved to talk.
He loved to talk.
Oh, he loved to gossip.
But I'll tell you what, he is an unsung hero for the things he did behind the scenes, like loan his airplane to people who were sick, who had to go to a hospital. There's so much of that people don't know.
Well, we will never know all of it. There's no way we will.
I watched him, give things to people, and there's a school in Macon County right now that he basically paid for every brick in the place, and then they wanted to name it for him, and he wouldn't let them name it for him. He wanted he didn't want them to know. He said, I've given the money. You name it for one of your best teachers, and it was just things like that. And it wasn't. You say it, and it sounds kind of pretentious or something, but it wasn't that way. It was not that way at all. It's just the way he was.
And Susan and I were talking about this. We got the call from Linda, being the media. First thing that he had passed away, and I wasn't as surprised as I was stunned, because we had gotten to know all the good things, or at least some of the good things he had done, and his optimism. But Susan, you and I were talking the other day, and a friend of his, And Milton McGregor had the ability to make you feel important. When you were with him, you were the one who felt important. If you look at people like his arch nemesis, Bob Riley, when they're in a room with you, they want you to know how important they are. And it's really, he had a giving spirit like that.
He had a giving spirit like that, and he, you know, he could make you feel like you were on top of the world, that everything was the most positive thing, rainbows, unicorns, all of that stuff.
Well, no, it was. You're right. It was. I never got off the phone with him or left a meeting with him where I didn't feel better about, you know. And here's the thing: if you knew what he was saying, well, there's no way he was going to be able to pull it off. When you left talking to him, you thought he's going to pull that off, man.
But this is why he was a billionaire.
Well, exactly. You know, all the news people want to call him a gambling magnate. I don't think he wanted to be remembered for that. Here's a guy who made a self-made man who made a gazillion-dollar investment in a county that approved what he was doing on a vote from the voters. And he got shut down. And I know he went to his grave regretting that they had gone after him like that because he operated in good faith.
But you know what hurt his heart more than anything about that shutdown is the people that were left unemployed by that. That grieved his heart constantly.
I know.
You know,
and he did so much for a lot of those people that were left behind there. And you know, we're talking about the kind of the optimism of him, and his son-in-law Louis Benefield told me a story one time. Is after this election with Trump, you know, and Milton supported Hillary Clinton. You know, and which was not a big surprise to anybody. But, you know, when Trump was elected, they were all watching the returns. And he said, you know, listen, everybody was kind of upset or, you know, a little down about the whole thing. And he said, listen, this is a big change for the country. And with big change comes opportunity for people to make a move, you know, on things. And that's the way he thought. It was, you know, you could be down or you could turn it around and figure out a way to make it work.
And he supported Republicans, he supported Democrats, he supported the poor, the rich, the white, black, Hispanic. When it came to who you were, Milton McGregor just wanted to know, what can I do for you and what can you do for the state?
And whether it was the most powerful person in the state or whether it was a janitor working at his casino, he treated everyone exactly the same. There's no difference.
And John Ed Matheson was right at his funeral the other day when he said Milton McGregor has done more for race relations in this state than probably any other person.
Well, he would call me almost every Sunday and he said, you laid it on him this week, big boy. Miss McGregor, I hope we laid it on him this week. You've been watching The V, the voice of Alabama politics. You watch us because we watch them.